Megan told me to shut up and stay in the kitchen on Christmas. The turkey was still steaming, the candles still flickering, but something inside me, decades of silence, sacrifice shrinking, finally snapped. By the time dessert was served, I'd carried the platter out the front door, not in anger, in defiance. I'd cooked for them for 25 years. Now I was done being invisible. And when they realized what I'd taken with me, it wasn't just dinner, it was my power. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. It was supposed to be a day of joy, but when she told me to shut up and stay in the kitchen, it was like everything crumbled. Helen straightened the festive tablecloth, smoothing the wrinkles beneath plates and garlands. The turkey glowed golden in the center, with candles flickering around it. She inhaled the scent of rosemary and roast vegetables. The air hushed with hope. It was Christmas dinner, her favorite family tradition, and she'd eagerly anticipated this evening with her son Daniel and his wife Megan, whom she'd not seen in person for most of the year. Conversations floated lightly at first. Daniel teased his teen children about a holiday memory. Megan poured wine for the guests, smiling politely. Helen felt warmth, the kind that spreads from hand to heart, and thought things were finally mending after a year apart. Helen reached toward the turkey to carve a slice, offering to help handle it. In the split second, before she touched the carving fork, Megan's slender hand swiped across Helen's knuckles. The fork dropped with a soft clatter. Megan said, voice cold and clipped, "That's mine." Silence crashed into the room. Helen froze, shock tightening her chest. Guests held their breath. Daniel shifted awkwardly, eyes swiveling from Helen to Megan, then back again, avoiding confrontation. No one spoke. Family chatter stumbled forward, fragile as spun sugar. The holiday hum turned hollow. Helen's heart throbbed with hurt. This was more than a rude gesture. It felt like erasure. Megan recovered composure and carved her own portion, deliberately ignoring Helen. She arranged the turkey on her plate in a way that looked practiced, like the part of ownership was already taken. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, would you like the gravy?" Helen swallowed. She nodded, her voice barely steady. When she reached to accept the gravy boat, Megan's hand interrupted again, placing it in front of herself. No words, just dismissal. Helen paused, hurt washing over her. She could taste the gravy she'd prepared, the thyme and butter, but somehow it felt bland. She sat up straighter, letting the silence widen. She realized she'd spent years stepping back to let others take center. Now the center felt stolen. Aunt June chimed in with a gentle question about dessert. Cousin Mark made a joke about winter travel delays. The room moved forward, performing normal togetherness, but under the glints of holiday light, Helen felt invisible. She caught Megan's eye as the wine glasses clinked during a toast. Megan offered a stiff smile before turning away. Daniel lifted his glass reluctantly, eyes not meeting Helen's. Helen exhaled softly, her throat tight. She cleared her voice. "Shall we open presents soon?" Everyone agreed. Conversation shifted to gift plans. Plates emptied, chairs scraped as meals concluded, yet the distance between Helen and Megan remained unmended. Helen finished her slice quietly, each bite cutting into memories of holidays past. Laughter, shared corners, supportive hands. Now that same space felt cold. She glanced toward the kitchen, then at Megan. Both offered nothing. When dessert appeared, pumpkin pie and cookies, Helen watched Megan take plate after plate, serving herself first. Helen did not put. In the crackle of holiday music from another room, Helen realized something shift had occurred. She was still at the table, but the center of it no longer felt her. The kindness and connection she had carried into this evening now felt rejected. The invitation to carve the turkey had collapsed into a boundary marked without apology. Helen thought of how many holidays she'd served from behind scenes, smoothing edges, softening tensions. Tonight her kindness had been rebuffed. She rose gracefully, offering to help clear the table. Megan declined briskly. Daniel offered no assistance. Helen gathered the platters, carrying them from the room under the hum of lights and unspoken strain. Helen paused by the half-carved turkey, her fingers still stinging from Megan's gesture. The room hummed with forced cheer, but in her chest burned an ache of betrayal. As she carried the platter away, she wondered quietly, how long had I allowed myself to be unseen, and would I stay silent any longer? The slap was just the beginning. Now every glance from Megan felt like an attack. Helen drifted into the kitchen, its quiet dim compared to the tense glow of the dining room. The faint hum of laughter and plates clinking felt staged to her ears now. She leaned into the counter, fingertips tracing its carvings, tasting bitterness that had built over years. She remembered Megan's subtle control from previous gatherings, shifting place settings, steering conversation to her stories, redirecting gift exchanges, even picking which ornaments got hung early. Each holiday her influence inched forward until Megan felt entitled to script the show. The slap was overt, but it had followed years of erased traditions. The clink of silverware brought her back. She rinsed her hands, then closed her eyes, inhaling the steam rising from the sink. Stillness gathered in her chest. She inhaled again, and slowly she carried empty plates back into the dining room. Guests' stories continued, but felt disjointed. Helen placed her dishes down gently at the edge of the table. Megan paused in carving another slice, eyes flickering as if surprised Helen had returned. Daniel's gaze hesitated, but he said nothing, yet guilt seemed to shift his shoulders. Helen cleared her throat softly. "May I have the gravy, please?" she asked, voice steady. For a moment nothing moved. Then Megan lifted the gravy boat and passed it to Daniel, who in turn offered it to Helen with a slight nod. It was a small gesture, but seismic. Dinner resumed with muted tension. Helen spoke with Aunt June about possible dessert recipes and shared a quiet laugh with Cousin Mark over old winter memories. She caught Megan's eyes briefly. No apology, no challenge, just recognition. Helen felt seen for the first time. As plates emptied and conversation shifted to holiday plans, Helen rose gradually. She offered help clearing the table, walking with intention toward the kitchen. Megan declined brusquely. Daniel hovered but made no move. Still, Helen felt no resentment. Instead, relief. She didn't retreat. Peering back, she saw Megan carve more turkey, not offering again. Helen paused for a moment, plate in hand, chest rising with steady breath. No longer small, no longer background. She reflected. When did I stop being priority? When did I stop giving myself space at my own table? Helen walked into the kitchen. She placed the platter on the counter, then paused, looking over the oak into the dining room's warm glow, candles sputtering, relatives wrapped in conversation. The holiday shimmer had dulled surrounding her, but inside, something bloomed. A seed. She would no longer be silent. She returned to the counter and busied herself. The kitchen felt like a sanctuary now, her domain. She washed dishes deliberately, the water cleansing more than gravy stains. Each plate scrubbed echoed, resilient. In the dining room, voices grew lighter as dessert arrived. Helen set out pumpkin pie and cookies with calm precision. The curve of her hands felt familiar again. The sting from the earlier moments lingered, not gone, but now beside a sense of clarity. She belonged. She looked toward Megan once more, a silhouette cutting another slice, distant but visible. Helen didn't stare, she just observed. Inside her, a quiet promise pulsed stronger than any holiday cheer ever had. She would not vanish again. Helen stood at the doorway between kitchen and dining room, plate in hand, watching Megan carve without offering. The memory of the slap stung but faded into something resolute. As she stepped forward, the glow of the candles seemed different, softer, less apologetic. She had re-entered the space quietly, but with intent. Something in her had settled and it would not yield anymore. Christmas dinner was supposed to bring us together, but Megan had made it clear, I wasn't welcome. Helen settled back into her seat, every holiday memory now hazy beneath the glowing lights and simmering tension. Megan lifted the turkey platter again. No offering, just another full slice tucked onto her plate. The room's quiet hum felt oppressive. Helen swallowed a rising. Megan cleared her throat before speaking softly, but pointedly. You always take the most food, Mom. I hope you're not going to overdo it again. Her voice was sweet, poisonous. Guests laughed awkwardly. Helen felt the words sink into her. Daniel shifted beside her, offering nothing but a tight-lipped smile. He didn't side with her. He didn't confront Megan. He watched. His eyes flickered. Helen realized she was alone in the middle of her own table. Kathleen, her niece, asked about dessert. Helen forced a laugh, offering suggestions, her chest tightening with each syllable that trembled with the unspoken. Megan passed the mashed potatoes to Cousin Mark and left seconds untouched, her plate heavy and exact. Helen stared at her, not hungry anymore. Each relaxed gesture from Megan felt like sharpening a blade. Inside Helen, something fractured. Years of stepping back, of smoothing tensions, of letting others take control collapsed in that moment. She thought enough. She looked around the table, flashing smiles, polite conversation. But under the glittering facade, the subtle erasures were loud. The stolen traditions, the minimized invitations, the way Megan had re-scripted every gathering to exclude her voice. All of it wrapped tight around Helen's throat. Her nostrils flared, anger coiled. She opened her mouth to speak, to claim her part, but then she closed it. Instead she stood. "Excuse me," she said smoothly, rising. Chairs scraped, conversation halted, faces turned. Helen remained quiet, presence steady, seat left empty by design. Megan's eyes widened, then shifted toward Daniel, but he looked away. Helen felt her chest tighten further. Tears threatened, but she didn't let them come. Helen's hand rested gently on the chair before turning toward the hallway. The warmth of the room receded behind her. She walked away, not in shame but with resolve. Down the corridor she inhaled cold air like medicine. Her reflection in the hallway mirror showed someone she'd forgotten she could be, firm, unwavering. Minutes passed in silence. The damp chill clung to her spine as she gathered herself. She felt anger but sharper relief. Clarity. A soft knock startled her. Daniel's voice hesitant. "Helen," she didn't turn. "Tell Megan I left." He didn't press. He didn't ask why. He simply stepped back. She heard his footsteps retreat. She exhaled. Alone in the quiet hallway, her thoughts spun, not of loss, but of return, to herself. Moments later, she re-entered the kitchen, the true heart of home. She opened a drawer and placed her napkin inside calmly, no longer hungry. She grabbed her coat. She opened the front door gently. The evening air wrapped around her. The house beckoned behind softly, but she pivoted toward the street. At her car she paused. The warmth lingered. The stinging of Megan's words still throbbed, but beneath it pulsed something stronger than hurt, a blossoming firmness. She slid inside, engine idling. Through the windshield, lights glowed in the house. A scene of celebration, but she felt removed, freed. Helen turned the key and sat breathing steady. She whispered into the silence, "I won't stay silent anymore." Behind her, the door stayed shut. Ahead lay decisions she'd nearly forgotten how to make. Helen pressed her hand to the steering wheel, her heart brittle but bold. She was free from that seat, but the evening's echo remained. Something inside had broken open, and for the first time in years, she knew this wasn't an exit. It was a beginning. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I grabbed the turkey and I walked out of the room. Helen looked at the turkey again, the full platter golden and steaming. Instead of carving a slice, she lifted it from the center of the table. Gasps echoed across the room. Faces froze. Wine glasses trembled. The room blurred. She held the platter high. Her hand shook with adrenaline, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Megan's face turned a furious shade of red. "Give that back," Megan demanded, voice sharp, brittle. Helen didn't hesitate. She turned and walked away, turkey in hand, through bewildered silence. Chairs scraped. Conversations died. Faces watched as she passed, silent and unwavering. Daniel rose from his chair, confusion etched in his expression. "Helen, wait," he stammered, but she kept going. She carried the tray with purpose, stepping through the hallway, past the living room, and finally outside. The cold air jutted in, crisp and honest against her skin. She stepped into her carport, set the platter down carefully on the hood, and exhaled. Her hands trembled, not with regret, but empowerment. She had claimed something, not just the turkey but agency. She felt relief, fear and a prickling guilt, quickly smothered by clarity. Then Daniel appeared at the open door. His face looked older, worn, conflicted. "I should have done that years ago," he said quietly, toe tapping on the porch. "I should have stood up for you, for us." Helen stared at him, breath catching. This evening had been for her, yet here he was, opening his own quiet confession. He paused. "Megan, she's changed me, made me silent too. I feel stuck, and I hate how I've let you disappear." Helen's throat tightened, shock and sorrow coiled together. The world she thought rigid, suddenly cracked. Daniel continued in a small voice, "I didn't realize how long I'd been holding all of it, how much I resented letting her speak over you, over everything." He inhaled. "I'm not sure I'm happy anymore." Diplomatic nights meant nothing now. He reached toward her, then pulled back. "I'm sorry." Helen looked at him, this man she'd known for decades, standing alone beside her. The cold night painted his silhouette. The turkey sat forgotten on the car's hood. She listened, silent but present. Her heart ached, not with triumph, but an ache that felt like uncoil. Everything shifted. Behind them, the house glowed warmly, muffled with unsettled cheers inside. Helen took a slow breath. The plate in her hands felt heavy, not with food, but meaning. She thought of every time she'd stepped back, ceded power, softened to keep peace. The night felt sudden, transformative. The platter she carried, still warm, mirrored the weight of her choice to step into herself or continue fading. Daniel's voice broke across the porch again. "I don't know what comes next, but I can't keep things like this." Helen stood near the cold metal of the car. Her reflection shimmered in the window, steady, unflinching. She answered softly, "Neither can I." No one spoke for a long moment. Beneath the holiday lights, they stood two figures facing an invisible turn. The world inside felt distant now. Helen shifted the platter to the passenger seat, her pulse steady but alive. The night air whispered future possibility. Behind her, the door stayed shut. Ahead, she didn't know, but she did know, she wasn't invisible. And Daniel's confession meant this wasn't just about the turkey anymore. It was about everything she dared to reclaim. "I didn't expect him to say that, but I wasn't sure what it meant for either of us." Helen remained on the porch, the turkey platter heavy in her lap. Dawn's chill whispered around her as she stared at its glossy surface. Daniel watched from the doorway, his confession hanging between them like smoke. He took a tentative step forward. "I didn't stand up to her," he said in a halting. "I was afraid of losing her, of rocking things. I let you disappear instead." Helen's throat tightened. Sympathy and betrayal pulsed in her chest. She could hear her own heartbeat, slow and steady. He continued, "I'm conflicted. I want the children to have stability, but I realize now the stability you offered was the foundation I lost." The weight of his words crashed into her. She thought of 50 years of quiet support, of backseat sacrifices, of refusing resentment. She looked up at him. "I hear you," she said softly, "but I'm done being sidelined. I'm done being polite when I'm dismissed." He looked down, his midlife tension laid bare. "You're right," he said. "I've been complicit." Helen shifted the platter into her lap more firmly. The turkey had cooled. Its warmth was no longer comfort. It was truth. Daniel inhaled. "I'm sorry, Mom." Helen nodded, regret threaded into relief. This wasn't triumph. This was release. She set her palm gently on his sleeve. "You'll have to decide." She said, between truth and silence. He shuffled, then nodded curtly. "I need to talk to Megan." Helen exhaled deeply. The air felt colder, cleaner. The porch light above her flickered, a solemn spotlight on this new boundary. Daniel turned and stepped inside without another word. Helen remained outside, the platter beside her. Cold turkey, cold clarity. She pressed her fingers to the cold metal of the car roof, steadying herself. She felt both exposed and liberated. Inside, faint echoes of laughter drifted through the glass door, but those sounds no longer pulled at her. She had left that resonance behind. Helen closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the early morning hush. Her life had pivoted, not with fireworks, but with quiet resolve. She lifted her gaze, tracing the street's shadowed line of lamps. Each one looked like a marker, memory behind her, possibility ahead. She rose and carried the platter to the porch steps. She placed it down beside her as if laying down more than food, years of holding down her own presence. Her hands no longer trembled. The platter rested beside her. In the night's confession gave way to dawn's clarity. Helen turned her head toward the doorway, but she didn't move. Daniel's footsteps were silent inside. Megan's presence remained unseen. She exhaled again, slower now. Guilt rippled, but beneath it lay firmness. No more soft edges, no more fading. The silence stretched. Helen could feel the porch air cooling with truth. As a car pulled up the driveway, she looked toward the road. A neighbor crept past, offering a wave. Helen returned it with a steady smile, anchored in quiet strength. The day had begun, not with reconciliation, but with reckoning. Helen felt the threshold beneath her feet, not just of the porch, but of her life turning. Inside, unseen shadows shifted. Daniel was inside, choosing. Helen sat with the platter at her side, cold turkey, cool She watched the roadway dim into morning light, hearing the echo of the door closing inside. Her world had narrowed to this moment. The platter, the empty porch, the weight of what she would no longer carry, and she felt something pulse beneath her skin. She was no longer erased. She was present, and the next step, whatever it was hers to take. I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't running anymore. Daniel re-emerged onto the porch, after a silence that felt like eternity. Helen's chest tightened, anticipation sharp as frost. She didn't look at him. Her gaze remained steady on the darkened street. He stood silently just inside the threshold, watching. Moments later, Megan burst through the door. Her face was a flare of anger, cheeks red. "This is childish," she spat, storming forward. "You ruined Christmas. You carried the turkey out like a performance." Helen met Megan's glare without flinching. The night air sharpened around them. She opened her mouth, but Megan cut her off again. "It wasn't about tradition or forgiveness," Megan continued, voice trembling. "It was a calculated Helen's pulse steadied. This was her moment to hold firm. She inhaled deeply. It wasn't about turkey. It was about 20 years of being pushed aside, disrespected in my own family. Silence expanded between them, so loud it hurt. Megan scoffed. "So now you're the victim, manipulating everyone into sympathy." Daniel stirred behind Megan, arms raised as though trying to soothe a gate. "Megan," he began. Uncertain. Helen interrupted softly, but firmly. "I didn't ask for apologies. I asked for dignity." Megan's nostrils flared. "You're rewriting what happened. You're a drama queen, Helen, and now you expect accolades for a tantrum." Helen's eyes cooled. "If standing up for myself is dramatic, then maybe you're blind to your own actions." Daniel's voice cracked with in-between. "Look, guys, can we calm down?" But Megan would not relent. "No," she hissed. "You'll regret this. I'm done with you." Heat blossomed in her cheeks, anger, disbelief, but also something clearer than hurt, finality. Helen's breath became silent obligation to herself. Daniel looked between them, frustration etched along his jaw. He attempted, "Maybe we should go back inside," but Megan shook her head sharply. "Not until you decide who you're siding with." She turned on her heel and stalked back indoors, door slamming shut behind her. Daniel lingered, torn in the doorway. Helen watched his silhouette collapse with indecision. She felt both distance and estrangement in its gravity. The platter lay beside her on the porch step, cold again, symbolic now of more than food. She picked up the tray, gripping it like ownership of her own story. Helen stepped off the porch, placing one foot on the gravel walkway. Daniel moved to follow, his voice small. "Mom." She paused, turning slowly. Light drifted from the windows behind him. His eyes pleaded. Helen replied quietly but with certainty. "It's not my job to fix what she refuses to see." She continued down the yard, turkey platter clutched under one arm, coat hugging each movement. Daniel followed slowly, but before he could speak again she added, "You need to figure out where you stand." He stopped. The echoes of his own silence pressed between them. Helen didn't wait. She reached the edge of the driveway and looked back at the lit doorway. It felt less like home, and more like the boundary she'd claimed. Back then, families offered refuge. Now it had become a space needing repair of its own. She turned toward the street, eyes ahead at an unseen horizon. The platter felt heavy, weighted by truth and consequence, but steady in her arms. In the glow of the house behind her, Helen felt the tremor of that last statement. You'll regret this. She didn't fear it. Instead, it echoed that something real had shifted forever. And as she stepped into the night, turkey still in hand, she breathed with intention. The next chapter would be hers. I had been patient, kind, and understanding for years. Now I was finally demanding respect. Helen stood on the cold porch, clutching the platter of turkey in one arm. The aftermath of confrontation lay thick in the air. She inhaled slowly, tasting clarity. Megan burst onto the porch, face flushed. This is childish. Helen, you carried out Christmas dinner like a spectacle, she snapped, voice tight. Helen kept her gaze level, internal pulse steady. Let Megan rage. Helen had earned ground. This was never about the turkey, she replied calmly. It's about being silenced in my own family. It's about respect. Megan's glare sharpened. Her arms went rigid. You always did everything first, from food to story. Now you act wounded when someone else holds space, she advanced. You want attention, but this was over the line. Helen nodded slowly. Every measured breath grounded her. I've spent holiday after holiday softening everything. Your words, your commands, your disregard. I let it go to keep peace. I've paid for that peace with invisibility. The tension sharpened. Daniel appeared in the doorway. Torn expression. He murmured something indistinct. Helen pressed on. This isn't entitlement, she said firmly. It's self-respect, and I'm done dimming myself to keep others comfortable. Megan sneered. So now you're the victim. Helen shook her head. No, I'm a woman who's been pushed aside. I'm standing up. I'm not asking apologies. I'm declaring boundaries. Daniel stepped forward. Megan, maybe we should go inside. Helen cut in, gentle but resolute. I'm not moving. If respect isn't given, I'll step away. Megan's eyes flickered with fury and disbelief. This family, I see how this ends. You'll regret this night, Helen. She spun on her heel and marched back inside, slamming the door. Daniel lingered in the threshold, silent. The door clicked shut behind her, and the murmur of the house swallowed them. Helen looked at him, unwavering. His clothes looked new, his silhouette rigid with uncertainty. You didn't stop her, she said quietly. You let me carry the weight of that silence alone. He flinched, opening his mouth, then closed it. He swallowed. Helen straightened, pushing the platter away slightly. Its presence suddenly felt symbolic, heavy with truth. She shifted her weight. Daniel's voice broke from the dark entryway. I don't know what happens next. Helen regarded the lit windows of their home, the piano-shaped glow of the living room behind them, then turned back to the road. I do, she replied, her voice quiet but wise. I'm going where I belong. She stepped off the porch, turkey platter tucked under one arm, coat closing around her. Daniel followed, but she didn't wait. He called softly, Mom, please. She didn't look back. Light spilled from the windows behind him, and faded as she moved through the yard. When she reached the driveway's edge, she paused. The platter rested against her hip. She pressed her lips together and exhaled, freeing air she hadn't realized she'd held. Daniel stopped halfway across the yard. She didn't turn. She kept walking. The night air felt alive. Under the pale street lamp, she looked ahead, not back, not chained by tradition or apology, just forward. Her reflection flickered in the car's hood, steady hands, determined stance. Behind her, the door remained closed. Daniel stood on the porch, quiet, unsure. Ahead lay midnight pavement, and possibility. She took her first step into the street, holding the platter like a shield and a declaration. I am here, and I will not disappear again. I didn't expect everything to change in one night, but it was clear. I couldn't go back to what I was. Helen paused at the edge of the driveway, night settling around her, like truth finally spoken. She clutched the turkey platter under one arm, cold now, symbolic, weighty as Daniel slowed a few paces behind her. Muffled strains of holiday music drifted from the house, but felt distant. He cleared his throat, voice low. Helen, I couldn't keep letting it go on. She didn't turn. The street lamp cast her reflection steady on the car's hood. Daniel continued, quieter. Megan's behavior. She's been hard on all of us. On me too. I've allowed it. Stayed silent. I know I've failed you. Helen inhaled deeply. The memory of past holidays that were silent compromises flickered behind her. You didn't fail me. You failed yourself by not speaking up. He shifted, uncomfortable. I've been scared of upsetting the balance, of losing peace, but ignoring it. I see now that peace cost us everything. She looked past him to the glowing windows. Inside sounded normal. Outside felt real. I'm not running anymore, she said quietly. But you still can. Daniel caught her gaze. His face seemed etched with regret and possibilities. I'm not sure what that means. Helen let the quiet stretch. She didn't need reassurance or apology. She needed clarity. Daniel inhaled. I've never been able to say no to her. I'm afraid if I do, it will fracture everything, including my relationship with you. Helen lifted the platter slightly and lowered it. Her spine straightened. Then you need to ask, what do you value more? Safety in silence, or the chance to heal what's broken? He swallowed. A pause, pregnant with unspoken weight. Daniel confessed softly, haltingly. I've considered therapy. For me, for us, for how Megan and I treat each other and what that does to the rest of the family. Would you be willing to try? For the sake of connection. Helen's breath caught. She'd expected bitterness, resignation, or cold finality. But not a door opened in his offer. She felt dizzy with the possibility. Still turned away, she considered, does she still carry hope for reconciliation? Or is this another complication she must navigate carefully? I'll do whatever it takes, she said steadily. But I won't let myself be dismissed or erased again. Daniel exhaled as though shedding years of silence. I'm willing to learn to stand up. If you'll show me how. Not for Megan, for us. Helen straightened fully. The platter felt lighter in her arm. The night air seemed to hold space. She didn't turn yet. She measured the moment, what had been lost, what might still be saved. Daniel remained quiet, behind her. The glowing windows behind him seemed smaller. He tensed, uncertain whether to follow or step back into the door. Helen stepped forward, moving toward the street. Pressure eased from her shoulders. She didn't yet know where this would lead, but she felt the line drawn. Without looking back, she said quietly, I won't shrink for anyone anymore. Daniel's voice reached her just before she rounded the curve of the driveway. Then, I'll try to stand by that. The glow from the porch lights pooled behind them. Helen embraced the chill of possibility. Behind her, a door remained closed. Ahead lay half-lit pavement, and decisions yet to be made. Her breath steady, she turned onto the street, turkey platter in hand, heart open. Daniel stood on the porch, hesitant, reflective, as the night held its breath around them. The beginning felt uncertain, but Helen knew she would step forward, unafraid. Perhaps this wasn't just about Thanksgiving anymore. It was about us healing, if we could. Helen traced the edge of the driveway with her gaze, turkey platter long forgotten beside her car. Dawn broke slowly, pale light softening the house behind her. Daniel stood in the doorway, silent support in his posture. Her thoughts still swirled, tied to the weight of promises and unspoken pain. Then her phone buzzed. Megan. She nearly let it go to voicemail, but curiosity pricked. She read the message. Can we talk? Today, in person. Thanksgiving got lost. I want to fix what I hurt. A simple invitation, one Helen never expected. Helen's breath caught. Her heart hesitated. She looked across the lawn at the house, where she once felt wholly welcome. Could she step inside again? Daniel wordlessly joined her, his expression hesitant. She actually sent that. Helen nodded slowly. Yes. He shifted, unsure. You think you should respond. Helen weighed the invitation. She felt tension coil between fear and possibility. I think I need to know if she means it. She turned the phone off, its screen dark. The choice felt bigger than words. Inside, children's laughter filtered through the windows faintly. Outside lay dusted frost and clarity. Helen inhaled crisp morning air. I've spent decades softening for others. Maybe this conversation matters even more now. Daniel exhaled. If she's sincere, this might matter for all of us. Helen studied him. He offered no assurance, only a look of taut hope. She clenched the platter handle, her palms steady now. Tell me, she said. What do you want from this? I want us all to heal, Daniel replied. If she really reaches out, maybe I was wrong too for staying silent. They exchanged a quiet look. Years of denial and distance converged in that moment. Helen couldn't predict the outcome, but she knew she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She tucked the platter into the car's trunk, leaving it there. Cold turkey no longer loaded with symbolism, but a part of the past. Inside the house, she retrieved her coat and a light scarf. Daniel held the front door. As she walked through the quiet foyer, guests from the night before were gone. Only the still scent of pine needles and stale wine lingered. Megan descended the stairs. Seconds later, the door held open. Her eyes were clear, earnest. Helen paused on the threshold, between leaving and staying. Megan's voice trembled slightly. "Thank you for coming. I know, this feels hard." Helen studied her. No anger flared now, only cautious recognition. She nodded. "Barely. I came because maybe this matters." Megan swallowed. "I've been thinking since last night, how I've treated you, the boundaries I crossed. I want to try taking responsibility." Helen's chest tightened. She held steady. Daniel stood behind, silent invitation in his stance. Helen swallowed. This was colder than confrontation, but it still burned with potential. Their three hearts gathered at the intersection of regret and possibility. Helen exhaled quietly, stepping fully into the living room. Her boots clicked softly. She realized she'd come not for closure, but to see if a crack might let something new grow. Megan cleared her throat. "Can we sit?" Helen gestured to a pair of chairs. The air felt fraught, but contained. She took a seat. Daniel folded beside. Megan inhaled. "I don't have expectation. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and to ask if we can rebuild respect. I don't expect instant trust. I want to earn it." Helen watched her. Megan's eyes glistened. Not vulnerability, but an offering. Helen's voice quiet. "This will take time, but I'm listening." Daniel nodded, relief pulsing through him. Helen felt tension loosen slightly across the room. Megan exhaled, tears forming. The future felt uncertain, not healed, but possible. Helen settled into the chair more firmly. They had started again at the point of greatest fracture. Their words might heal, or widen the distance, but for the first time, Helen felt she had a choice about what came next. She sat, breath steady, heart open. Megan's apology floated across the quiet room. Outside, turkey forgotten on the porch. Inside, something fragile had begun. Helen wondered, but dared to hope. Could this invitation change everything? This was the hardest conversation I'd ever had, but it felt like it had to happen. Helen settled into the chair across from Megan. The sunlight filtered through winter branches, scattering pale patterns across the carpet. Daniel remained silent at the edge, his presence steady but unspoken. For a moment, silence held tight. Then Megan spoke, voice uneven. "I want to be honest. I've been under so much work, expectation. I shut you out because I felt attacked." Helen searched her face. Megan's gaze softened. "I was afraid of losing Daniel to his life, to your presence here. I took it out on you." Heat cracked in Helen's chest. She exhaled. "It hurt. I felt replaced. Every comment, every control around this house, told me I didn't belong." Megan blinked. "I didn't realize. I thought I was building security, but you looked like the intruder." Helen's heart thudded. She realized this was raw truth, not weaponized remorse. "I've been scared too," she admitted. Scared of fading away, of being treated like an accessory in a celebration of Megan and Daniel. Megan's eyes glistened. "I see that now. I was building up my space, by shrinking yours, and I didn't stop. I'm sorry." Helen's voice softened. "I don't want apologies anymore. I want respect. I want to know we both have space, that our words matter." Megan nodded, clearly tense. "I think I need boundaries too. I didn't set them, so I defaulted to blame." Her tone trembled with genuine recognition. Helen leaned in. "You have a place here," she said, "but you also need to earn it." Megan hesitated. "I want to," she whispered. "I'm trying." Tears trembled. "I don't know how without hurting you more." Helen held her gaze. "Then let's start slowly." Megan swallowed. "I've pushed family traditions toward my vision, gift expectations, the menu, even the decorating. I thought it was innocent, but it erased your voice." She paused. "I'm sorry I didn't see it." Helen nodded. Fear edged around hope. "Thank you." There was relief in her voice. "I've held resentment, yes, but I've also held love for what this family could be." Megan's shoulders loosened. I don't expect perfection. I want to show up differently. They exhaled in unison, the room steadying. Daniel cleared his throat lightly. It's strange, but I feel lighter just being forgiven. That made both women look at him, with something like warmth. Megan looked at Helen. Maybe we can try this together. She searched Helen's face for acceptance. Helen felt the tension loosen. She almost smiled. Yes, she said, voice cautious, but real. If you're willing to listen, and willing, when we disagree. I am, Megan answered. Her eyes glistened again, not with tears, just resolve. Helen turned to Daniel. But you also owe yourself permission. Permission to speak, to stand. He nodded slowly. I'll try. A fragile stillness followed. A wall lowered, not removed. They all sat quietly inside its space. Helen realized this wasn't instant trust, but a step toward possible healing. In the hush, Megan reached out and placed her hand on Helen. It felt unfamiliar and hopeful. Helen pressed her fingers beneath Megan's palm, an acceptance of that olive branch. Outside, the winter light deepened. Inside, 3 figures sat with the weight of reality, and the first flicker of something different. Helen watched Megan's hand flex quietly beneath hers. The apology hung in the air. Not neat, not cured, but offered. She breathed. Steady. Whatever this became, it began tonight with words spoken, wounds opened, and a promise rooted in truth, that maybe, just maybe, something could grow from it. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt like the right first step. The next Sunday afternoon unfolded with surprising softness. Light filtered through cream curtains at Helen's house. A simple lunch salad, soup, quiet music. She'd invited Megan and Daniel to begin anew. The table held space, not ceremony. Megan arrived first, placing a small plant on the sideboard. A peace offering, she said. Helen accepted it gently. The gesture felt tentative, sincere. Daniel lingered by the threshold, scanning the room, uncertain yet open. They sat around the kitchen table, not the dining room, where tensions had erupted. Helen ladled soup. Megan arranged napkins. Daniel poured water. Small acts of normalcy felt vast. Helen spoke first. Thank you for coming. Her tone was soft, not triumphant. This feels new. Megan nodded. They began by naming boundaries. Megan admitted, I want to hear you. I'm learning what you need. Your space, your voice. Helen explained she needed acknowledgement, not competition. Megan agreed. No more dismissing Helen's input in holiday planning or household matters. Daniel chimed in more often, clarifying he'd stay silent no more. I'll support both of you, he said. The words felt deliberate, earned. The conversation moved slowly. No past blame, just attentive listening. Helen asked Megan how she could help rebuild trust. Megan answered with humility. Let's decide together. Decor, gifts, guests. If I propose something, I'll ask you first. Helen felt the offer carry weight. They discussed communication. Megan promised to speak kindly, to avoid passive remarks. Helen saw her mother-in-law's shoulders relax. Something unspoken released. Daniel shared. I'll listen when one of you speaks, not after, drawing quiet approval. Helen saw him look at Megan, solidarity forming, not siding but balancing. Later, Helen peeked at the kitchen doorway. Megan served cupcakes they'd made together earlier. Smiles brief as they caught each other's eyes. No awkwardness, just human connection restored. After dessert, Helen led them to the living room. Small warmth in the seating arrangement. Megan accepted without pause. They settled near the fire. Helen's granddaughter ran forward, tugging at Megan, who lifted her. Helen watched, chest light with gratitude. Daniel moved to offer wine. Helen watched him, newly confident in his role. Not mediator, but participant in family life. They reflected on shifts. Helen admitted she felt recognized for the first time beyond mother or grandmother roles. Megan said she felt heard, not just. Daniel admitted he felt relief sliding into fairness, not avoidance. Helen recognized this was fragile healing, not robust reunion, but tender bridge. She didn't expect perfection, just steps of goodwill. Megan cleared her throat. Would it help if I invited you to family planning conversations? Holidays, menus, gifts, no assumptions? She looked at Helen. Respect glowed. Helen nodded. I'd like that. Daniel offered to schedule regular family check-ins. No conflicts, just connection. They laughed softly at the idea, tentative but real. Afternoon light shifted into gold. Helen stood and gestured toward the window. Look, it's bright outside. Megan and Daniel looked. The winter sun felt warm through the glass. Silence followed, comfortable now. Helen felt the room soften around them. At the threshold, Megan leaned lightly toward Helen. Thank you for staying, she whispered. Helen nodded. Thank you for trying. Then she turned to Daniel. And thank you for walking with us here. Daniel offered a faint smile. No declarations, just presence. They parted eventually at the door. No hugs, no dramatic farewells, just understood departure. Helen watched them leave. As the door clicked shut, the warmth of the conversation stayed. She turned inside and exhaled. The kitchen glowed in lamplight. She felt anchored. Later, Helen closed the door behind her. The house calm. She placed the plant from Megan near the window. She glanced at the kitchen table, now tidy, still bearing crumbs of conversation and forgiveness. Helen stood by the counter, listening to the distant street hush beyond frost-glazed windows. She felt something solid settle inside her, a family still healing, but choosing to move forward. She turned away from the quiet kitchen table, mindful that today's steps were not the end, but a beginning. And she realized for what comes next, she's ready. It's been weeks since Christmas, and things are different, better, but there's still work to be done. The weeks since that tense holiday evening glided by like fragile beginnings, steady, careful, and hopeful. Helen sat at her kitchen table, sipping afternoon tea as soft sunlight streamed through frost-flecked windows. Lemons sat on the counter, fresh and yellow. The house felt different now, not quieter or more shadowed, but alive with possibility. There had been small changes. Daniel offered to do errands without prompting. Megan asked Helen for feedback on dinner menus, instead of dismissing her. The grandchildren greeted her by name in the morning instead of rushing past. Yet habits lingered. Sometimes Megan reverted to telling stories Helen had shared as if they were new. Daniel would drift back into silence when temps flared. The wounds hadn't vanished, but they softened. One afternoon, Helen arranged Lily's art supplies on the kitchen island. She glanced toward Megan, who paused beside her and offered, "Need help?" That simple offer felt monumental. Helen nodded, and together they sorted crayons. It was a quiet collaboration, but one she hadn't believed possible a month ago. Yet old instincts hassled at her, stepping back, shrinking mute. Once when Megan suggested seating arrangements for an upcoming family dinner, Helen felt hesitation bubble. She paused, then gently spoke. "We should ask Grandma which table she'd prefer." Megan blinked, surprised, but paused. "You're right," she said. "Let's ask." These ripples of respect built a new undercurrent. Daniel stood more present in the middle, not mediator, but steady present. When voices grew too loud during dinner, he'd softly say, "Maybe we slow down," offering Helen space to speak. With him anchored, Helen found courage. She told stories, old holiday memories, childhood mishaps, without shrinking. People listened. Still, the shift was not perfect. One evening, table talk slipped back into familiar hierarchy. Megan's jokes overshadowed Helen's thoughts. A long silence followed. Helen stuck with it. She spoke calmly about a past disappointment, and Megan listened. No flinch, no interruption. After dinner, Megan said quietly, "You're right, I dismissed that. It wasn't dramatic. It was real." Helen found herself enjoying time again, tea with Megan, phone calls with Daniel about projects, small visits with the grandchildren. She even hosted a crafting afternoon, inviting an artist friend and the kid. Megan showed genuine interest, asking her tips. Daniel helped with the tables. The team felt whole. There were setbacks too. One Friday, Helen lifted the plant Megan had given at Christmas, and noticed it drooped. She texted Megan, "The plant looks sad. I think it needs watering." Megan brought over plant food the next day and stayed to chat. They watered together, laughed over the irony. Helen found that even caring for a fragile plant brought connection. Yet insecurity lingered. She wondered, is this sustainable? Will they step back when I speak again? 2 nights ago, she called her sister, admitting, some days it still feels like I'm waiting to be erased. Her sister replied, but you're not erased anymore, you're not invisible again. That birthing of self inside Helen felt fragile, but she realized family was no longer about fading. It was about mutual space. It was on a quiet midweek morning that her phone buzzed. Megan, can we start fresh? Helen's chest tightened. Can we start fresh? The words hung simple but heavy. Helen stared at the message, sunlight pooling on frost-lace curtains behind her. The house felt warm. She traced the plant leaves. She felt a weight and a lightness. The offer loomed bigger than proof. It was invitation. She didn't answer immediately. She exhaled, savoring the space. Then she typed back. Yes, let's. Helen leaned back in her chair, tea growing cold at the edge of the table. The conversation hadn't fixed everything, but a door remained open. As she looked up toward the window, frost sparkling like new beginnings, she breathed more deeply than she had in months. Fresh starts weren't easy, but they mattered. And somehow she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. Everything had changed, but the real power, I now knew, lay in my ability to stand up for myself. Helen settled into her favorite armchair, the late afternoon sun illuminating the pages of her journal. Frost still traced the window panes, but inside warmth pulsed steady, uneasy, honest, and real. She closed her teacup, the surface cool to the touch, and exhaled. Since Christmas, something fundamental had shifted within her. She reflected on all that had happened, rising from her seat, carrying the turkey across the porch, drawing a line in holiday expectation. Yet the real transformation wasn't dramatic gestures. It was in choosing herself day after day, in insisting on being seen, in refusing to shrink quietly. When the world asked, Helen thought of Daniel, who now paused to ask her opinion before decisions, not out of duty, but respect. She thought of Megan, whose quiet apology felt weighted with regret and resolve. She thought of herself, no longer tethered to fear or tradition. The power she held now came not from being served respect, but from demanding it. Daniel appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Mom, Chloe wants to talk, he said, shifting uncertainly. Helen looked up. Megan, Chloe to her, stepped forward slowly. Her face was softer now, eyes warmer but wet. Helen's heart lodged in her throat. She rose from the chair, careful not to rush or retreat. Chloe hesitated. I've been wrong, she said quietly. About everything. How I dismissed your ideas. How I dismissed you. I was so afraid of being overshadowed. I did exactly that to you. Helen's breath stuttered. She had expected tension, fear, even entitlement, but not confession, not apology. Chloe continued, voice stronger. That night, when I told you I took too much food, it wasn't about turkey. It was me projecting my insecurities onto you. I'm sorry. Helen swallowed, seeing her own reflection in those words. She remembered times she'd held her tongue, smoothing edges so Megan could shine. Now Megan was doing the same for her. Daniel watched from the doorway, face taut but hopeful. Helen felt the significance of that space between them, solid ground newly built. I've thought about what it means to be present, Chloe said. Not perfect, but present. I want to honor your voice, not silence it. Helen nodded slowly. Her hands were steady. This matters more than I can say, she replied. Thank you. Chloe exhaled. I don't expect things to fix overnight, but I'd like to try. Helen considered the moment, her chest heavy with gratitude and cautious hope. Then she reached out to Chloe's hand. Silence held their breath. Outside, voices filtered through the kitchen, the grandchildren's laughter, the hum of daily life. It sounded more welcome now. Helen looked at Chloe. Everything settled. Vulnerability, remorse, repair. Daniel crossed to stand beside them. I'm proud of both of you, he said quietly. Helen felt the weight of years, the erasure, the shrinking lifted by admission and intention. She thought of her own evolution from quiet corners to shared decisions, from self-erasure to self-respect. Power lived not in dominance, but in presence. Chloe squeezed her hand gently. Would you consider leading family gatherings more? Your traditions matter. Helen's lips curved quietly upward. I'd like that. The three shared a moment. No grand declarations, just softened understanding. Helen realized she no longer dreaded inclusion. She craved it, and had earned it. The afternoon light turned golden. Shadows deepened around the edges, but the center burned steady. Chloe and Helen stood together, not adversaries, no longer erased, and Daniel held space behind them. Helen thought, I will never let myself be invisible again. As Helen returned to her chair, the journal opened before her. She felt an echo of all she'd gained, the power of self-worth, and now the bond of respect. Chloe's apology marked a turning point. She dared to hope for something new, and in that soft winter light she knew nothing would ever take her quiet place again. I didn't expect the apology, but it was the beginning of something new. Helen adjusted a cushion on her living room sofa, daylight warming the walls with soft gold. Through the window, wreaths and frosted branches hinted at the approaching holiday season. She'd intentionally invited Megan, Chloe and Daniel for a late afternoon gathering. Simple soup, and a chance to continue rebuilding what had fractured. Now they sat around the coffee table, mugs steaming, conversation tentative yet real. Chloe cleared her throat, voice even. I've been thinking a lot about what I said the other day, the way I've dismissed your traditions and opinions. She met Helen's gaze direct. I want us to reset to include you instead of overshadowing you. Helen felt something shift, not obligation, but respect in the air. She nodded. That means more than I can say, and I've been afraid that nothing would change. They leaned into honesty. Chloe admitted she sometimes spoke over Helen without realizing, driven by insecurity, not malice. Helen listened, not shrank. She told Chloe how each holiday suggestion excised her voice, how the old roles had been hard to escape. Chloe's sigh seemed to carry relief. She said, I want to rebuild with boundaries, not competition. I want us to choose plans together. Decorations, meals, guest lists. Helen offered a small smile, eyes softening. That kind of respect would feel like being seen. Silence followed, but it was warm, not fraught. Daniel stirred his tea, watching. He spoke up, genuine, surprisingly firm. I've stopped standing back. I'll support both of you now, not mediate, but balance. I'll speak up when one of you needs space. Helen glowed at that. She realized that her role had shifted. Not just grandmother, not just mother-in-law, but a respected participant. Chloe, sensing it, reached out and brushed Helen's hand with hers. The gesture trembled but carried weight. They continued, outlining small new traditions. Chloe suggested alternating who led holiday menu planning. Helen suggested inviting neighbors for her annual cookie exchange. Daniel agreed to host once-a-month game nights in their home, so each woman could contribute. They spoke of old habits, Chloe acknowledging she sometimes dominated conversation, Helen admitting she used to recede to avoid conflict. They agreed to honest resets. Chloe would ask questions before deciding. Helen would share instincts where she felt valuable. Daniel would facilitate space, not favor. The grandchildren, oblivious to tension, flitted through the room. Helen caught Chloe's eye and swallowed down vulnerability. Chloe nodded, discreetly reinforcing their alliance. Later Lola brought cookies for everyone, and Helen laughed when she teased Chloe about baking too many. Chloe joined in, sharing secret ingredients. The moment felt genuine, not performative. As sunset deepened, Daniel stood to refill mug. He turned to Helen and said, I appreciate who you are more now, beyond labels. Helen felt that acknowledgement reverberate. She realized her quiet power now lay not in being silent, but in being firm in her presence. Chloe squeezed her wrist. Thank you for staying, she whispered. Helen replied, voice steady. Thank you for trying. Daniel nodded, relief visible in his eyes, but also pride. The afternoon's warmth drifted into evening. Christmas lights outside blinked faintly. Inside, 3 people sat anchored in fragile renewal. Helen knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be friction, old habits, sharp edge of uncertainty, but something essential had changed. The tone of inclusion, the language of respect. She looked at Chloe and Daniel, two people who had once made her feel invisible, now working to shift history. She felt seen, worth listening to, not out of courtesy, but because her voice mattered. She realized this family could grow around her, not around her absence. They rose to leave, the gathering brief, comfortable, no dramatic closure, just mutual pause. Helen walked them to the door. Chloe lingered for a moment, looked down, then said softly, "I want to learn." Helen placed a hand on her shoulder. "And I'm here." Daniel exhaled, shoulders releasing. They stepped outside. Helen closed the door gently. Inside, warmth remained, but she felt anchored in her quiet center. Helen stood in the hallway, framed by soft light and distant echoes of laughter from deeper in the house. The day hadn't healed every wound, but it had opened a new kind of space. She had regained her voice, and they had offered theirs in return. As the winter dusk fell, Helen realized that belonging no longer required shrinking. The family was choosing to rebuild, and she was ready for what came next. The turkey was just the beginning. "Today I sit at the table," my voice finally heard. Helen sat at the large oak dining table, a centerpiece of holly and candles before her. The afternoon light cut through frosted windows, illuminating faces she no longer felt invisible beside. For the first time, she looked around and felt both acknowledged and peaceful. The room hummed with gentle conversation, children chasing each other underfoot, Chloe arranging platters of homemade dishes, Daniel pouring wine with quiet assurance. This felt different. This dinner wasn't fraught. It was Helen traced the gentle curve of her plate's rim, tasting her own confidence. She had insisted on being seated here, at the head, not as tradition, but because she'd earned space. Chloe caught her eye and offered a small smile, sincere and warm. Daniel folded his napkin beside her plate, his expression steady, the kind that said he would not back away again. Conversation flowed. Daniel bridged a conversation to holiday plans. He asked for Helen's opinion about hosting their extended family for New Year's brunch. Helen offered ideas freely, suggestions accepted with nods and interest. Chloe chimed in, thanking Helen for sharing her grandmother's biscuit recipe, promising to learn it by heart. Helen felt a swell of pride, her traditions being restored, not erased. Kids ran laughter between courses. Helen watched her granddaughter place holly sprigs beside each napkin, an act Helen taught her last year. Chloe noticed, and said softly, "That was Grandma's touch." Helen's chest warmed. The table acknowledged her role. She acknowledged it too. Frosty laughter and quiet gratitude filled the room. When a family friend complimented the cranberry relish, Helen smiled and described the secret ingredient, rosemary. Chloe added, "And she insists we grow it every winter." Laughter followed, inclusive, celebratory. As dessert plates arrived, gingerbread, trifle and sugar cookies, Helen found herself seated between Daniel and Chloe, surrounded by people who listened. There was no awkward distance anymore, no echoes of past silence. Now each word she spoke carried weight. Daniel reached across and touched her hand. "I'm proud of you," he said under his breath. No announcement, just intimate sincerity. Helen nodded, feeling the words settle like long-awaited rain. Dinner wound down with stories of childhood winters, Chloe politely listening for one. Helen shared one about building snowmen with Daniel, and this time, Chloe didn't redirect the story. She leaned in to listen. Daniel stood and raised a toast. To family evolving, mending and including each other fully. Glasses clinked warmly. Helen felt a convulsion of emotion. Fear, relief, gratitude, all folded together. They cleared the table together. Chloe and Helen washed dishes side by side, the water warm between them, conversation light. When plate stacking paused, Chloe said softly, "Thank you for staying." Helen smiled back, feeling that gratitude returned. Daniel stacked chairs. Helen watched him move with fresh steadiness. No passivity, no retreat. She realized he'd changed too. More present, more balanced, more respect. When the children bundled outside to build snow angels, Helen paused and looked at the decorated tree. Light danced across ornaments she'd helped hang. She looked at these small domestic signs of belonging and recognized her worth here, not as guest, but as integral to the home. Chloe joined her with a cup of cocoa. "I'm glad we're doing this right," she said. Helen nodded. "Me too. Inside, warmth pulsed. Outside, snow drifted silently. This Christmas dinner held quiet peace, ripe with intentional presence. Helen stood at the threshold, hands on the doorframe, gazing inside. The family, her family, gathered in laughter and comfort. She felt the power she had reclaimed, to speak, to belong, to shape. No words were needed. She looked at Chloe, who squeezed her hand. She looked at Daniel, who nodded toward her with respect. Helen closed the door gently behind herself, and leaned back for a moment, breathing in the afterglow. In that silence, just outside the door, she felt it. Belonging didn't require shrinking anymore. Her voice had made a difference. And tonight, at that table, love had begun to include her fully, even as tomorrow remained uncertain.